Hello and welcome to ATP Report. I'm Barry Nussbaum. We have a very wonderful surprise guest for you. Well, it's not a real big surprise. He's here regularly, but he's a member of the ATP family. But first, homework time. Please take out your cell phone if you haven't signed up yet and subscribe to our text message alert system. It will give you all of our shows like this one on the palm of your hand, right in your cell phone, absolutely free. All you have to do is text the word truth in the message box and address it to the number 88202. When you push send, you'll be signed up for free and you'll get all of our stuff like the amazing Robert Spencer, who's here today. As you all know, Robert Spencer is a regular contributor to ATP Report. He is the founder of Jihad Watch. He's published and written over 22, 23 books. He is the scholar on Islam in America and around the world. Welcome, Robert.
Good to talk to you, Barry, as always. Thank you.
Let's start off with what's going on with the madness in Ukraine. As everybody knows, there is an invasion that has taken place. And quite frankly, it's very distressing, wondering whether or not we're going to send American troops at some point. But you wrote an interesting article on Jihad Watch that I wanted to ask you about. You talk about Mark Milley, our general who runs the armed services for the President of the United States. And he has this idea in mind that it's more important right now to have a transgender policy that creates the equality that General Milley wants. And there's these bizarre training programs on gender pronouns. They're coaching officers on whether or not soldiers should gender transition from one side of the fence to the other. So while Vladimir Putin was amassing hundreds of thousands of troops and planes and tanks and mortars and cannons, we were transgendering in the US Army. What do you make of this?
It's madness, Barry, and it shows why Putin, very likely why Putin thought that it would be a good time to act. Not only is Biden obviously not the man in charge, not only is the administration obviously weak, but also its priorities are ridiculous. It's not the job of the military to coddle men who think they're women and women who think they're men. It's not the job of the military to make sure that transgender people feel comfortable. It's the job of the military to win wars and defend the United States. Now, when Putin saw that the military is instead spending its time on this kind of nonsense and critical race theory and every other fashionable leftist item on the agenda, then it's clear that he thought that the United States would not pose a significant counterweight to his plans. We can only hope that Biden doesn't recklessly get this military into a war at this point, because it's simply not ready for it. It's been paying attention to all the wrong things, and it would likely be an extraordinary embarrassment for the country, and probably worse.
Well, speaking of Ukraine and the President of the United States, I have got to get your comment on what our Vice President just said. I'm going to read it word for word so I don't get it wrong. Here's the quote from Kamala Harris. Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong. Now, this is not a quote from Sesame Street from this week. It's an actual speech by the actual vice president of what used to be the most powerful country in the world, the United States. And Biden sends her to meet with European leadership, and she comes up with statements like this. Does anybody respect her on the world stage?
Oh, I would doubt it. I think that it's another indication of the decline that the United States is experiencing right now, that somebody like that is vice president. Because we have to remember, Barry, this is not the only time she's spoken in this silly a manner. Remember, not too long ago, she was asked about inflation, and she said, prices are going up. And, well, I knew that already, but I was hoping for a little more insight on the problem, but she was not, of course, going to offer it. And this shows people like Putin and other foreign leaders of malevolent intent that the United States really isn't anything to worry about. The people at the top are idiots. And if they're not idiots, they're completely wrongheaded. They are paying attention, as we were just discussing in connection with General Milley, to all the wrong things.
Well, you're right. And sadly, you're very right. If I'm Putin, right, and I'm reading this, I don't know if I'm looking at Sesame Street or Captain Kangaroo, for those of us that are old enough to remember the captain. Russia is a bigger country than Ukraine, which is a smaller country, and they're both in Europe. This person is one heartbeat away from leading our country and makes statements that sound like she belongs on, well, educational TV for fourth graders. It's really pathetic. So speaking about these philosophies, the creator of the New York Times controversial 1619 project is now commenting on, well, surprise, surprise, Russia and the Ukraine. Except this quote's really weird. Nicole Hannah-Jones, as you remember, created the 1619 project, proving without a shadow of a doubt that we are a white, racist, misogynist, white supremacist country intent on suppressing Black people forever. This was her quote a couple days ago. Quote, supremacy around the media coverage of the war in Ukraine isn't even subtle. And she shared a clip of Al Jazeera, the Arab cheerleading site, citing the prosperous middle class in the Ukraine who are desperately trying to board trains to escape the war. And then she says, what if I told you Europe is not a continent by definition, by a geopolitical fiction to separate it from Asia? So the alarm about a European or civilized or first world nation being invaded is just a dog whistle. In other words, this war is because there is no Europe, and it's just because there's white people in the Ukraine. This person is still lionized by the New York Times on a daily basis.
It just shows the level of intellectual discourse in America today. Everything now has been politicized, and the left sees racism everywhere, even when it's not there. This is obviously a very tense situation. This could easily escalate into a European war and into World War III. And so it's really not to be downplayed. And to act as if people are only upset about it because the Ukrainians are white is just an indication that somebody like, what's her name, Nicole Hannah-Jones, she can't see anything in the world except the racial issue. And so she's constantly seeing it everywhere. Well, you know what they say, to the man who only has a hammer, every problem is a nail. And this is an indication of that, an example of it.
Let me follow up on that. Why is she still given a platform when she says things that are so stupid that we only care about the slaughter of the Ukrainians because they're white, and Europe is not a continent? It's really part of Asia, and that's part of white supremacy. I mean, come on, Robert. People are publishing this drivel on a daily basis.
They only have hammers too, Barry. They see everything in terms of racism. I think their agenda is to stir up racial strife in the United States. I think that's what the 1619 project is all about. The whole idea is to not to allay or alleviate racial strife and resentment, but to increase it. And that's the whole agenda here, in order ultimately to engulf the nation in a civil war so that there will have to be an authoritarian crackdown and the end of constitutional rule, followed by some kind of dictatorship. Obviously a leftist woke dictatorship. As David Horowitz has so memorably said, inside every leftist is a totalitarian screaming to get out. And so all the members of the intelligentsia that echo what Nicole Hannah-Jones says, it's because they have the same agenda.
Scary stuff. Speaking of which, you wrote an article about my hometown that really has me upset. Not the article itself, but what you reported from San Diego, a Girl Scout troop, which I always admired the Girl Scouts. I mean, it's a service organization. They teach wonderful skills. They are now learning in San Diego how women in Islam are equal to men in Islam. And yet, as you point out, the Quran teaches that men are superior to women and they should beat them if they just might fear disobedience. Men have authority over women because Allah made them that way, and they spend their wealth to maintain their women. Good women are obedient. They guard the unseen parts because Allah has guarded them. So on and on and on of all the reasons why you beat your women and you control your women and you sell your women and you can kill your women. And the Girl Scouts in San Diego are teaching women are equal to men. Come on, Robert, who creates this insanity and why is it tolerated?
Well, this is a largely Somali Muslim migrant Girl Scout troop. And so the local paper in San Diego, I guess it's the Union Tribune, they were teaching this, they were reporting about this, showing how wonderful it was that the Girl Scouts were giving these Muslim students, these Muslim girls, the opportunity to learn more about their religion. The problem is that these are girls, they're going to grow up and they're going to come up against almost certainly the hard edge of reality. And that is that they're going to realize, no doubt unpleasantly, that Islam doesn't really teach what they've been saying. But these things are constantly spread, particularly in the United States, but also in Western Europe, primarily in order to fool non-believers and make them complacent about the nature of Islam and the nature of Sharia Islamic law. But there's a human cost to this, and this story illustrates that.
Well, thanks for bringing it to my attention, even though I'm embarrassed for San Diego. And shame on the Union Tribune. I used to deliver that paper many years ago. And they report this like it's great news. Hey, look at the equality, even though, as you point out, and you've been writing about it in dozens of books, it's a complete lie. And yet it's reported as a fact. And when there's not a Robert Spencer out there to correct it with chapter and verse, people just go, oh, isn't that lovely? They're like us. Robert, where can people find out about you?
At jihadwatch.org, online, the only site in the world that gives you news about jihad activity, which is still very much with us in the United States and around the world. Jihad Watch RS on Twitter, and there's even a Jihad Watch Facebook group.
And all of you out there in ATP land, please follow Robert if you want to know anything about this profoundly urgent subject. He is the source, and he will teach you not only what the truth is, but he'll give you the source to go look it up for yourself so you become someone that can defend their position. I strongly urge it. And for all of you that joined us today on ATP Report with Robert Spencer, I appreciate you coming on with us for ATP Report. I'm Barry Nussbaum.